is the 25th of July, 80 years ago, this day, President Harry Truman of the United States decided to drop the atomic bomb on Japan. This was following a directive that came from various individuals of the Manhattan Project. That decision, made on July 25th, followed a May 22nd report from British Ministry of Defense called Operation Thinkable, which discussed the possibility of a nuclear war, a total war involving nuclear weapons against the Soviet Union to begin as early as July 1st of that same year, 1945. These were classified documents recently called great attention to, but we only reference this because the uh, momentous and disastrous moment of that decision 80 years ago today haunts us to this day. We do not believe, those of us who've assembled in the International Peace Coalition, though of course it's worth being debated, that there was any reason for such a decision. And the danger that that posed at that time is with us in a way today that we always wish to call attention to. But we also say one other thing about the International Peace Coalition, which is that the reason it was formed was because the dysfunctionality of the international peace movement, which has a lot of different warring factions and so on, has to be superseded by a single group or a single orientation, a single mission, which is to supersede differences and to move the world toward a functional and new security and development architecture. And so the person that has both inspired the creation of the International Peace Coalition and also been talking about that new security and development architecture with her 10 principles for a new security and development architecture is Helga Sepp-LaRouche, the founder of the Schiller Institute, and she will begin today, start us off, and followed by other speakers. So Helga, welcome, and you have the floor.
Yes, hello to all of you. Well, we are also celebrating, if you can use that word, celebrating the 80th anniversary of the Potsdam Declaration. And, it's quite important to rethink that because on the one side, the Potsdam Conference was, at least on the surface, an effort to re-establish some order after the chaos of the Second World War. But a closer look at the events of these days reveal exactly the duplicity which the whole strategic situation is suffering from today. Because as you, Dennis, just mentioned, Truman, on his part, while on the one side talking about the Potsdam process, which had the nominal topic of the peace order, the geographical and political reordering of Germany after the Second World War. But Truman, while he was talking about it during the conference, indeed give the order to bomb Hiroshima somehow after August 3rd, when the weather will get better, was his instruction. And, Churchill, on his part, had already commissioned his staff in April and May to work out this operation Unthinkable. So while they were, in one sense, talking about, a reordering after the Second World War, they were already actively preparing the Cold War. Now, it happens to be that on that particular beginning of the Potsdam process, Stalin was one day late, and Truman and Churchill took the occasion to drive through the bombed out streets of Berlin. Potsdam is a sort of suburb of Berlin. So these two were driving through the bombed out cities, and I just happened to have seen a documentary showing footage how Berlin looked like. It was completely, utterly in ruins. All the streets were, in rubble. And then I also looked at a documentary about the last 100 days of the Second World War. And what you can see in this documentary is unbelievable destruction, bombs falling, destroying cities, many people being on flight, refugees, terrible scenes of war. And then if you look at the today discussion, about getting war ready from the German Defense Minister Pistorius, or the Rearm Europe program of the European Union, you almost have the feeling that the entire horrors of the Second World War have been completely forgotten, and that except for some old people who may still be alive from the Second World War generation, there seems to be a complete amnesia about the horror, what war actually means. And I think it is quite important that we try to revive the memory, because people are playing with something. If people would be asked an honest question, do you really want that? Do you really want to end civilization by, getting a war between NATO and Russia, which some people keep saying is unavoidable? Objectively, this is absolutely not tenable, because if you look at the military expenditure of NATO and compare that to Russia, it's a complete unbalance to the disadvantage of Russia by an order of magnitude. So the idea that Russia is preparing a war of aggression is really ludicrous. Now, I think it is important to keep this historic memory alive if we want to avoid a catastrophe, because this amnesia seems to work so well that even if the horrors of the genocide going on in Gaza is visible for anybody, who just turns on their TV set, and in the recent period, it is even, you can even see it in Western media in Germany, for example, which had been blocking on coverage for a long time. Now you see tiny children, babies, toddlers being, like a skeleton in the end phase of starvation. So nobody can say that they are not witnessing the horrors going on in Gaza. Nevertheless, the situation there is far from reaching a necessary breakthrough, because, just in the last several days, the negotiations collapsed. Basically, the Witkoff left. He claimed that Hamas is not acting in good faith, and that basically the US has to pursue other options now. A person from the State Department named Tommy Pickett says, yeah, sure, there is hunger, but if there is a humanitarian catastrophe, it is at the feet of the Hamas, because if they would surrender, they could end this right away. Now, obviously, Macron, and this is big in the news, has announced that he wants to recognize statehood for Palestine. And there are very mixed reactions to it. The Palestinian Authority welcomed it. The Saudis, Qatar, and other Arab states also basically sort of welcomed it. Francesca Albanese did not think this was amounting to too much. And the reality is, the horror show goes on. Haaretz, for example, they have an article where they say that the Israeli government is pursuing a policy of deliberate starvation, basically portraying the policy of complete horror, so that the remaining people in Gaza are convinced to finally leave. Then the Knesset has voted in a non-binding vote that Israel will now annex the entire West Bank. And on the side of mobilization against that, Brazil has not now joined the suit in the International Court of Justice against Israel. And more than 100 NGOs and humanitarian organizations are demanding an immediate ceasefire. Now, it looks like that at the two-state UN conference, which will be taking place in the United Nations next week, judging from preparatory steps, it will not be attended on the highest level. So therefore, probably not much will come out of this. We don't have any indication that a breakthrough will occur there, but we should absolutely keep up our mobilization to put the Oasis plan on the agenda. Now, that catastrophe being not the only one, the situation in Ukraine is still building up for a future catastrophe. The Russians are making massive headway on the battlefield. The signs that several Western governments are preparing the ouster of Zelensky are continuously going on. And basically, the situation is unfortunately still extremely dangerous because Wadeful, the German foreign minister, says that Ukraine will soon have long-range missiles capable of reaching deep into the territory of Russia, hinting to the Taurus, but not being explicit about it. So I think this is still an extremely dangerous situation where, also the fact that the United States is now delivering weapons again to Ukraine. The State Department just approved $322 million worth of boosting up the air defense of Ukraine. So, this situation remains unsettled. And obviously, with the coalition of the willing pursuing their policies and the very, very dangerous tripartite coalition of the willing treaties between France and Great Britain and Germany, and Germany and France, this is still absolutely geared towards potential catastrophe, which can happen any time. So I think the only countervailing or counterweight to all of that is the second round of documents which has been released by National Director of Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard. The first batch of documents which she had revealed that the Russia Gate was completely an operation by the Obama administration. A lot of documents to back it up had been completely ridiculed. I mean, in Germany, for example, there was no honest coverage, basically no coverage at all. And then after several days, only saying, finally, Obama said this is ridiculous and there's nothing to it. In France, apparently the coverage was somewhat more objective. But there is a clear effort by the mainstream media to play it down. Now, Tulsi Gabbard did release a second batch of documents, a lot of documents, and I think that this is the battle, which will determine the fate of the United States, because if it turns out that the accusations made by Tulsi Gabbard are indeed backed up by fact, it does require a rewriting of the entire history. And one comment coming from a relevant Russian was that all the sanctions which were the result of Russiagate and everything associated with it, they need to be lifted, and in a certain sense, not only that, but compensation would have to be paid by those who are responsible for it. So just to sum it up, I think we are still in an extremely dangerous trajectory towards World War III, and I think we absolutely have to follow what Dr. Pandor had said to our Schiller Conference in Berlin, where she had given the Schiller Institute and the International Peace Coalition the responsibility to grow and become, such a voice for peace which cannot be overheard. So I would appeal to all of you listening, help us to build this coalition larger and bigger, and get mobilized to really, wake up the population, which to a very large extent is still sleepwalking in front of this catastrophe. And that's what I wanted to say in the beginning.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Helga. And for people that just got on, this is the 112th meeting of the International Peace Coalition. And we also just want to call attention to what Helga concluded with, which was her reference to the conference, the Schiller Institute conference, which happened in Berlin. It's called Man is Not a Wolf to Man for a New Paradigm in International Relations. We can put a link particularly to the first panel of that conference and the whole conference in the chat. So you can take a look at that. It's important to take a look and see what Dr. Naledi Pandor and others had to say there. What we're going to do now is we're going to go to Professor Richard Anderson Falk. Professor Falk is the former United Nations Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in the Palestinian territories. He held that position from 2008 to 2014. He's also an emeritus professor of international law at Princeton University and was the chairman of the board of trustees of the Euro-Mediterranean Human Rights Monitor.
In the context of the Gaza situation, the formation of such a tribunal takes place after the formal system exhibited an inability to enforce international law. It did some positive things, such as the International Court of Justice's response to the South African submission that Israel was in carrying out its policies in Gaza was violating the International Convention on Genocide. It was very professional and juridically impressive in responding to that submission by issuing some interim orders that acknowledged the plausibility of alleging genocide and condemned Israel's disruption of international delivery of humanitarian assistance. These interim rulings were directed to Israel, but were defied as expected. And so an enforcement gap was made clear that the ICJ could declare authoritatively the law, but its enforcement, if a state such as Israel refused to voluntarily comply, was subject to the veto of the only part of the UN system that had enforcement capabilities and authorities, the Security Council. And that meant that the UN was paralyzed in dealing with enforcement or accountability or complicity. And the objective of the Gaza People's Tribunal is to close these gaps, or at least to exert pressure on these gaps by activating people in civil society to exhibit solidarity initiatives that support the Palestinian struggle by both placing pressure on governments to stop supplying arms, to cut diplomatic relations, to do various things that would indicate a more than a verbal commitment to end this genocide. And it is shameful that the Arab governments that could exert decisive pressure have proved to be passive or even indirectly supportive of Israel's tactics in Gaza. So the two main objectives of the tribunal are stimulating activism by civil society, individuals, and other collective actors, NGOs, and so on. And the second one is to document in as objective and comprehensive way the crimes that have been committed centering on the genocide, which even if the ICJ eventually comes with a favorable decision, will not be rendered for a couple of years at best. So this is promises a quicker result, and a result guided more by the pursuit of justice than a legalistic conception of wrongdoing. In other words, a formal court is bound by the technical rules of a legal process, and that means impartiality and due process for the accused side. This tribunal starts with the premise of Israeli guilt, and it makes no attempt at appraising the arguments advanced by Israel in an objective manner, but it does try to treat the evidence available to it in as objectively as possible, and to proceed along lines somewhat similar to what the special rapporteur, Francesca Albanese, has done in her 3 genocide reports, create an archive that is authoritative as to the criminality of the Israeli policies. So it's action-oriented and archivally ambitious, and has involved a good many highly qualified people.
That was Professor Richard Falk, and as he said, he has the Gaza People's Tribunal. This was formed in November of 2024 in London. He also referred to it as a court of humanity and conscience. If you just joined us, this is the 112th meeting of the International Peace Coalition. We wanted to just first of all acknowledge Professor Falk for what his work is. Also point out and just remind people that there are over 1,500 medical personnel that have been killed in Gaza, and over 300 journalists that have been killed as well. So when he speaks about the idea of starting from the premise of the guilt of the Israeli Defense Force and related activity, that's to be seen in the context of classical nonviolent actions taken by people throughout the world. And it's important that we see that conflict in the way in which he's proposed it. We are at the moment we're waiting to see whether or not we have Larry Johnson, who's often gotten on our program here. It said that we had Ray McGovern, I think, on the program that people have. Let me just point out that Ray and his friend Bill Binney are presently occupied on another location right now, giving sort of reminding people of a story that they broke 7 years ago, 8 years ago, involving the what Tulsi Gabbard's material is now covering, some of which people have known, but it was Bill Binney, who was at the National Security Council, and Ray McGovern, who jointly wrote an article for Consortium News at that time, documenting that there was no technical capability for Russia to have hacked the DNC. That material was largely ignored at the time. I'm proud to say that members of the Schiller Institute, together with them, held various activity. In fact, I have in front of me just a little card from November 12th of 2017, where Ray and Bill Binney, CIA analyst Diane Rourke, assembled. And so Ray's still doing that broadcast. One of the things I'd like to do at this point is get the report, a report on the activity that we conducted yesterday at the United Nations, directly with respect to the ongoing process, the process that will be that has begun around these considerations around Palestine. And if Jose Vega is there, I think we can go to that report now. Is that the case?
Can you hear me, Dennis?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right, great. Hi, everyone. Thank you for allowing me to come on the platform once again. My name is Jose Vega, congressional candidate here in New York City, and also an organizer with the Schiller Institute and the LaRouche Organization. And yesterday, the LaRouche Organization and the Schiller Institute went to the United Nations. And what we had stumbled upon was that there was a youth summit happening as well on various different issues and topics, but mainly centered around human rights and human rights abuses happening around the world. And we were out there giving out the leaflet that the Schiller Institute has put out, an Oasis plan for Palestine and Israel, mutual development for all. Now, we went out there with about 500 leaflets or so, and we gave out almost close to 500 or so. And I then took the opportunity to go in front of the United Nations building, and I just started talking to various people that were there, giving them the leaflets and using the leaflet as a basis of conversation. And what I found were people from different countries in Europe or New Yorkers who represent various countries here just because of their ethnicity and background, who were happy to speak to me, take the leaflet, and talk about the injustices happening in Gaza and the starvation that's happening. A lot of people said that they were going to be fasting today. I understand today is an International Day of Solidarity through fasting because of the starvation. So just for those of you who are participating, I wish you well and stay hydrated. But regardless, we were able to sort of tap into an environment out at the United Nations where there are people from various different countries and different parts of the United States as well, who are there, whether they were protesting, whether they were showing up with a sign or displays or just something to continue this awareness of people starving in Gaza. And one of the more important things that we did too was talk to people who actually vote at the United Nations, various people who were coming in and out of the building. We would try to give them leaflets and we would tell them, will the United Nations recognize a Palestinian state? And many people who were walking in, who had the badges, who were delegates themselves, would grab the leaflets. They would express solidarity and say, yes, we're working on it. You know, we're the people who vote on this. You know, we're working hard. You know, I was telling people about the upcoming summit that's happening on Monday, Tuesday, and the various demonstrations that are going to be happening that day, encouraging people to go out and do a demonstration of their own. And so it's going to be, I think, a great organizing environment Monday and Tuesday, because I think people have had quite enough, and that is the energy that we tapped into. I think that some of the reactions that we had, by the way, from various students. So, for example, we had a guy from French, he was French Italian, and he was really happy to hear what I was talking about. I had recorded a statement out in front of there, and he agreed to be interviewed. I met a person who ran for city council here in New York City, specifically in Queens, which is one of the most populated. Specifically, he was referring to a specific area called Richmond Hill, which has a large Punjabi community. And he told me that he was there at the United Nations. He himself was invited to go and speak on behalf of his community and to speak about the several human rights abuses happening around the world. I think one of the, and the other thing was the social media posting as well. I had posted the video on social media, and people were happy to see that there were people out at the United Nations who follow me on my various social media platforms, that there's people out there, and that there are people calling attention to this injustice, and that there are people out there who are trying to get other people to go and organize. So to everybody on here as well, I would just ask you that no matter where you are in the world, you know, you're probably near an embassy or something, and a demonstration can be very powerful, and it can have quite an effect. So I would just urge you all to continue to organize. Definitely take what you've heard on here on the program and use it, share it, spread it wide. And I just want to thank all of you again for hearing my report. And if people want to see any of the content that I put up from the United Nations yesterday, people can go and find that on my social media. I will put the link in the chat to that. So, yeah. Oh, you know, Dennis, I know you had also referred to the Ray McGovern thing. If people want to watch that on Consortium News, it's still going on live. But yes, they were talking about the things that, yeah.
No, that's why Ray, he's not on for a good reason. I'll put it like that. Thanks a lot for that, Jose. Let me just ask for a moment here, Dennis, if there's anything you want to say, not so much in response to what Jose had to say, but anything else on the strategic situation. Just to say for people, it was mentioned already, the fasting that's going on today, but there are supposed to be days of action, and there are various activities, some of which are being coordinated directly by the International Peace Coalition, and some of which just involve various organizations. If there are people that want to put something or indicate something about that to us, when we get to the Q&A section, we'd be happy to have that recorded and also make those activities available to people. So, Dennis?
Yeah, there we go. Sure. As the eyes of the world, and in the West in particular, are riveted on the horror underway in Gaza and on struggles to find a solution, an answer to this, to stop the genocide. And as we see the back and forth of what's going on around that, including the cancellation by the United States, as Helga mentioned, of the negotiations for frankly gratuitous reasons. The problem here is not whether Hamas is being selfish or not negotiating fairly. The problem is there is an intentional genocide, ethnic cleansing policy being implemented by the Netanyahu government with the full support and backing from the United States and from Great Britain. at this point. But as the world's eyes are riveted on that, and also on what is happening around Ukraine and those developments, and by the way, negotiations today underway in Turkey, I believe it is, in Istanbul, between Iran and the E3, the European three countries, Great Britain, Germany, France, over possibly coming to a negotiated settlement on that. As all of that is properly a subject of our attention, there is another area which is rarely even covered in the Western media, but is strategically absolutely critical. And that is a series of 3, 4, 5 days of meetings and summits which will occur in Beijing, China. Tianjin, which is nearby to Beijing first. The August 31st through September 2nd will be a summit meeting of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. This is a very important international grouping. It involves many of the major nations of the world. It includes Russia, it includes China, and it includes India as well. Putin will be in China for that meeting and for a summit meeting, a bilateral summit meeting to follow with Xi Jinping the next day on the 3rd, I believe it is. And at this point, it is expected, although not confirmed, that the Prime Minister of India, Modi, will be in Beijing for that summit meeting as well. This is extremely important because over the last couple of years, the hatchet is being buried between India and China. This is a very delicate, strategically critical point. But the conflicts that do exist between them, especially the ones orchestrated by the British, such as those on the India-Pakistan border and so on, have in recent months and years begun to come more under control. And Modi's presence at this meeting, at the SCO meeting, will be very important. The subjects taken up there will be the alternatives to the current global drive, because of the bankruptcy of the transatlantic system, towards war, including towards nuclear war. And I think it were appropriate that we have our attention on that meeting as well, which will occur August 31st through September 2nd, and then the follow-up summit meeting with Putin and Xi, which will occur the next day, is also of very great significance as well. They will also be taking up these kinds of issues. And these are the issues that are on the agenda of what we've sometimes called the global majority. Sometimes people refer to this as the global South and the global East. In other words, all of the people who refuse to go down with the sinking Titanic of what the current policy is on the West. The critical point for us, obviously, as part of and central to our mobilization to stop war, to bring peace, and so on, is to address these underlying issues, which will be addressed at those meetings, that the actual true interest of the United States and of Europe is to ally with, not be at war with Russia and China and so on, but to actually work with them for the joint development of the nations of the South. In particular, the Schiller Institute has been very active and has prepared a draft program. It's not yet completed, but it's a first pass at an updated proposal for Chinese-German cooperation for the development of Africa, which is this isn't win-win. This is win-win-win. All sides benefit from such an approach, other than Wall Street and the City of London, and in particular the desperate migrant crisis facing Europe and facing the United States from a different direction. But the same crisis, driven by the financial breakdown, the economic crisis, and these wars, perennial wars, should be addressed by this kind of a program for broad economic development. The Oasis plan is simply a partial example of the kinds of policies that can and must be implemented across the board. And so this initiative regarding Africa in particular, I think is very, very significant. But again, it would be wise on our part, I think, to keep in mind, and we will cover in upcoming meetings, these developments in parts of the world that are representing the majority of the world's population, are not covered in the Western media, but are absolutely decisive. These are our natural allies in the quest for global peace based on development. So that's one of the updates that I thought would be useful for people to have.
Okay, so I don't know whether or not, I don't believe that we have Larry Johnson yet. Is that right?
I don't see him, no.
Okay, then if what we could do is we could decide, first of all, let me just ask whether Helga has anything in response to any of what's been said. And failing that, what we'll do is just go directly to our Q&A discussion. So Helga, anything that you'd like to say at this point?
No, let's go to the Q&A.
Okay, so fine. So then, Dennis, there's an announcement we have to make pertaining to that, right?
Yeah, but before that, I see that Jacques Cheminade has raised his hand. So let's include him and his comments in this part of the discussion, which is recorded. And then after that, we can go to the Q&A. So if you give me 1 second, I'll find Jacques on our lengthy list of participants here, and we'll ask him to unmute, please. Okay, Jacques, you should be a panelist.
But I'm doing it again.
Yeah, no, you're good. Go ahead. You're now muted, Jacques.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, perfect. Now we can hear you.
So to go back to what Helga said before at the beginning, how we feel it in Europe. I was in 1946 coming from Argentina into Europe, and we were with my family in a train, and we went through Caen. It smelled rubble, it smelled smoke, it smelled destruction. It was in 1936, 1 year after the war. So I asked my family who did it, why? Isn't Europe supposed to be the cradle of good things? I would not say at my age civilizations. And then today, when we look at Gaza and what's happening in Gaza, we feel the same way. So in particular in Europe, we have this thing, and now it's emerging in France, which is very interesting. The press, even the press is saying that the French population is fed up with the domestic scene and the micmac of the domestic scene, and is rather fascinated, they say, by what's happening in the world, the issue, what's at stake in the world. So we distributed our declaration, our statement, in 2 or 3 places in Paris, mainly in the Defense Ministry in France, of the Defense Ministry. We distributed 400, and 100 in the Quai d'Orsay. What was very interesting in the Quai d'Orsay, the Foreign Affairs Ministry, is that the police asked us to leave. But the security from the Quai d'Orsay said we can do nothing about that, but we are proud, we are very happy what we are doing, and we are going to bring our leaflet in. So that's one thing. Then the French press is now saying in detail what's happening in Gaza and the West Bank. For example, in Le Parisien, which is the main read newspaper, they give the word to the Médecins du Monde, the doctors of the world, who saying Gaza is becoming an open-air cemetery. And they add that the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation is a criminal hoax. The colons in the West Bank, they say, kill at random. This should be put an end. Even at this point, the Daily Express, British, had a first-page picture, that a cover picture, with a woman dying from hunger. And they said, how long are we going to tolerate that and not do anything about it? So that's the mood. There is a shift in the process. At this point, the report 600,000 Palestinians suffer from malnutrition, and already more than 100 died from hunger. And they have only access to dirty water, and some are really about to die from thirst, not only from hunger. So the policy of the West Israeli government, reports even Le Monde and Le Figaro, is to get the Palestinians out of Gaza and the West Bank and eliminate them. So they said Ben Gvir and Smotrich, the ministers in Israel, say it openly, Netanyahu sneakingly, as a snake. So Ofer Bronstein, which is advisor to Macron, was not able to be with us today, but he got the statement. And also, what is widely shared by all our contacts and friends, and also the retired militaries that we talk to, is that there are three conditions that the Macron initiative to recognize the Palestinian government in September at the United Nations session would mean something. First is that Marwan Barghouti should be freed, because he's the only one who can talk independently to the Israelis. And they say that the letter from Macron to Mahmoud Abbas means very little because he's senile and he doesn't represent anything. So the thing that should change for real, the horror should be really stopped in Gaza and the West Bank. And finally, they all agree that the Oasis plan has to be the main reference for a future. It's the only way to avoid and to create something which would bring people at a higher level and avoid an endless confrontation organized by outside forces. And the agreement, I met people, Shiites, Sunnites, and Israelis briefly, and they all say that it comes from outside. Of course, inside people become crazy, but it comes from outside, and this has to be stopped. Something has to be done in Europe and the United States. So they all say, we are very happy with your efforts, but the efforts should succeed. Also, from Berlin, we showed to various people, again, LaRouche's triple curve, and in the context of the present criminal hoax of the cryptocurrencies, stablecoins, etc. So they reacted very well, and they say, now we start to understand with what's happening now with all this hoax. Well, something now really understanding what LaRouche meant, because what is happening is what he had predicted. To end up with that, I must add that here, everybody, not only in our organization, but in people we discuss with, are very happy and very excited by the coming of the youth of the world for the cause of peace on November 8 in Paris.
All right. Thank you very much, Jacques. We're going to now go to Larry Johnson, Veterans Intelligence Professionals for Sanity, who's with us. So, Larry, you now have the floor. I think you're muted.
There I go. Sorry, I was late in joining. We're at a pretty interesting period right now of let's call it U.S. impotence. Despite the impotence, still in a position to cause a lot of mayhem and death. The facilitation of the genocide in Palestine continues, but we're finding quickly that there's not a lot the United States could do to change the course of the war in Ukraine, other than to pull out and withdraw all support. It would bring it to an end much quicker, but Trump doesn't seem willing to do that. And it's sort of, regardless of what Trump wants or Trump thinks, Russia's got a military plan that they are executing, and it's the pace of their latest offensive is accelerating with each passing day. They're in the process of taking this key strategic village of Pokrovsk right now. If you would have asked people 2 weeks ago, they were saying it'd be 2 or 3 months before that would happen. It looks like it's going to happen literally within the next week. This will not be settled at a negotiating table. This is going to be settled militarily. The only issue is whether or not the Germans, the French, and the Brits will be stupid enough to put troops in, to try to send troops to secure Odessa. If they do, they'll be going home in, as body bags, because Russia is not going to allow that to happen. We keep hearing that Russia says that the root causes need to be addressed, and the root cause is very, very simple. It was the expansion of NATO to the east. So NATO needs to be rolled back from Russia's perspective to the 1997 level. Fewer members, none of them on Russia's borders, with no NATO military exercises being carried out in either Ukraine or Romania or Hungary. Russia sees this as a potential threat. And Russia is uniquely positioned right now to carry out military operations. And it's a sharp contrast to the United States. When Donald Trump talks about sending military, he's boasting about sending non-existent military equipment to Ukraine. He's wanting to send Patriot missile batteries that don't exist, Patriot missile batteries that don't have missiles. And oh, by the way, we're going to send them. It'll be sometime in next year. And what it has highlighted is that the complete lack of strategy and any kind of thinking on the part of the whole Trump administration. So they decide they want to get tough with China and to bully China with tariffs and threaten them with 500% tariffs. And yet we need to really expand our drone production here in the United States, because drones are the wave of the future, except China controls 90% of the market in terms of the production of the engines for the drones. So we need China for that. We're going to up the production of our 155 millimeter shells. We need something called antimony, which is a rare earth mineral, which China has that. We don't. So, I mean, across the board, we pretending that we are independently wealthy and that we have access to our bank account, when in fact we've discovered that we're actually living on the edge and living off of our parents' credit card. We don't have that independent wealth. I'll stop there.
Larry, let me ask you a question. Well, actually, let me ask Helga, is there anything you'd like to respond to about what Larry just said first?
No, I think what you are saying is very much to the point. The only thing which I really have a very hard time, despite the fact that you're thinking about it all the time, is what prevents these establishments from recognizing that, because there is such a complete delusion and unwillingness to recognize that their policies failed. But what is it in your view?
Yeah, I mean, I'm as puzzled as you. What we're witnessing, it's sort of very, I'll call it the Hegelian dialect, the dialectic. So the United States decides that we're going to use sanctions on Russia and China in order to force them, compel them to do our will. And in the process of doing that, we have now unleashed a desire on the part of Russia and China to create an alternative economic and political world. BRICS, prior to the start of the special military operation in February 2022, it was still a nice idea, but it didn't have any meat on the bone. Now look at what's happened just in the course of the last 3 to 4 months. China has set up the cross-border interbank payment system, SIPS. SIPS is an alternative to SWIFT. SWIFT is basically an email system between banks for moving money. It's an archaic system. It's controlled in Europe, in Brussels, I believe. And when you do it, it's pretty expensive. You're going to pay anywhere from a 5 to an 8% fee, and it's going to sometimes take up to 3 days for a transaction to go through. Well, the SIPs, that is digital. It's blockchained. It is instantaneous within seconds, and it's very, very low cost. So it's just it has every positive advantage. So right there, the United States thought we'll control Russia and China. We're going to shut them out of SWIFT. All they did was create this incentive for them to seek an alternative. They've got that. London was the center for maritime insurance. All ships, man, you can't sail them seas without our insurance. And they cut off Russia. We'll teach you. Russia set up ghost ships, which are insured by Russia. So Russia's creating its own maritime industry. Russia was banned. We sanctioned them. No more Boeing aircraft for you. What did they do? They've now built their own commercial jetliners, and they're going to be mass produced starting next year. So they'll no longer, in fact, they realize we no longer need to buy from the United States. The London bullion market, it has been the center. That is the gold market. You want to buy gold, that's where you go. Moscow is now setting up an alternative in Moscow to London. And so now, with every single threat that comes out of Donald Trump's mouth about BRICS, and he simply reinforces among those different countries the fact that we've got to get away from him. We've got to have an independent system. So the West, in its arrogance and its hubris, doesn't recognize this. That's what I find so shocking. We've come to believe our own lies, that we're the best, we're the biggest, we're the strongest. And it was highlighted. I saw a TikTok video the other day of a Chinese car, an SUV, and you press one button, the second row of seats, one of the seats goes back, then makes a left-hand turn, comes to the door, so you could actually get up and, if you were in a wheelchair or had some sort of infirmity, you could get into the seat, press the button, and then it would take you back into the car. And you press another button, and it flips those two seats completely around so that you're facing the third row of seats, so you could have like a meeting in your car, and down comes a 30-inch television screen. And we're saying we're going to sell cars to China because we make better in America. Are you kidding me? So what's happened throughout the West is this arrogance that, we're the best, we're the biggest, we're the strongest. And the fact of the matter is we've been bypassed by Russia and China. And, the rest of the global South, they're waking up to it. And they're saying, no, we no longer have to be held hostage to the West.
Larry, partially because of the way you've described your view of what that process is, I'm going to ask that first, if Dennis Small has something to say. I see also I'm going to come back to Helga as well. But Dennis used the term Hegelian dialectic to refer to the way that the BRICS process happened. I wonder if you have any response to that.
I sure hope it's not a Hegelian dialectic. No, just a few comments on what you said, Larry, which is, I think, pointing in the direction of the real issue here. One caveat: I think that the BRICS did get off the ground in 2014 in the meeting in Fortaleza, Brazil. That's where the original five really got going in terms of the idea of developing massive flows of credit for development projects. It is true that everything related to the SMO in 2022 simply made it clear to everyone around the world that either they were going to sink with the Titanic or they had to develop this new potential into something really completely different. I think that the reason, to partially also get into the discussion about what Helga is raising, the reason for this hubris and the reason for this idea that or this argument that the world can't live without us is not only phenomenal stupidity. There's plenty of that. There's no question about that. But there's something else, which is if their system is going to survive, they can't do it any other way. This is past the point of no return. There is a $2 quadrillion cancer sitting on the West's financial system. The only possible way that that can be kept intact and kept in control is on the basis of wars and wars to destroy China and Russia. You have Trump going in exactly the wrong direction on this with these announcements of cryptocurrency, which is, I mean, this is just a follow-up on quantitative easing and quantitative tightening, which each ran their course to bail out the bubble for a certain period of time. Starting 2021, they were no longer turning the trick on that because the rate of increase of the financial aggregates was far too great for this monetary aggregates to catch up with. So now you have this idea of cryptocurrency and stablecoins, which is nothing other than, I mean, if you think money issued by the Fed with no real backing is funny money, cryptocurrency is financial instruments issued by private interests, by every Tom, Dick, and Harry.
Right.
So, I mean, this is really funny money. And then, of course, when these things go belly up, which they will for sure, you can't go to collect from anybody except Tom, Dick, and Harry, and good luck finding them. So you've got a situation where the response to the blowout of the Western system, financially and economically, from the centers of power, and this, I don't think it's Trump's idea. I think it's more Besant and Wall Street and the City of London and so on, is to go in exactly the wrong direction. And the only way to actually turn this around is if it can be made clear to these establishments and drive some sense into their head that the actual solution is to work with China and Russia, to work with the BRICS, which is why I mentioned, I think this was before you got on, but there's these upcoming meetings of the SCO in Beijing in just a couple of days, a week, which are going to be very important, followed by the China-Russia summit, followed by the 80th anniversary celebrations over there. And so the actual positive alternative that provides an answer to these existential questions is really critical. I think the BRICS are moving forward with fits and starts, scared on some stuff, but also driven exactly as you were saying. They look at this stuff and say, listen, you're leaving us no choice. You know, the idea that what the BRICS did with quote unquote de-dollarization was unprovoked attack on the dollar, it's nonsense. It was Wall Street and Trump and Biden who sank the dollar. They're the ones who did the de-dollarization. This was very provoked, and the next steps that are going to happen as well. In all of this, though, I think the providing of an actual alternative solution that works, that could be made intelligible to people, is our best pathway. It's a narrow one, but it's our best pathway out of this kind of conundrum. And I don't think that Hegel provides the answer to that. Much more, you know, Leibniz, Kuza, and LaRouche, and so on. I know you weren't promoting Hegel.
Right.
I do have you may have a response to that, Larry, but I do have a question also for Helga though on this, because what I think about when I hear how you formulate it, Larry, and a lot of people do this, is as though the process which we see around BRICS doesn't actually come from the people who initiated the process, that they have an actual idea about where they think the world should go. They have their own nations, they have their own sovereignty, and they moved for economic development. And I just wonder, Helga, if you have any, I mean, I have a question sort of directed to you. There's a way for us to think about this so that it's not as though everybody in the world is only reacting to the United States, London, or this or that. But there are people out there, a lot of them, who have their own view and have their own lives and are trying to develop from their own cultural standpoint of economic development for their own and prosperity for their own people.
Well, I think that the inability of the Western establishments to reflect on why their policies are failing and why the policies of the BRICS are succeeding relatively I mean, for example, if you look at, I mean, what did the United States and the West do in respect to the developing countries? The United States has more than 800 military bases around the globe. And what they offer to the respective countries where these bases are located is they say, we offer you security, but they don't offer development. They don't offer infrastructure, industry, agriculture. So, right now there is a huge battle where the Americans are trying to, sort of compete with China and Russia and so forth in places like Africa and some parts of Asia, but they don't offer real development. And, for a developing country who are right now, because of the rise of China and the Belt and Road Initiative and all the many corridors which have been developed, they now have experienced that for the first time in history ever, not that the non-aligned movement did not try that earlier. They tried it with the Bandung conference and with the early parts of the non-aligned movement, but at that time they were too weak. Now they are partnering with China and they get real development. They get fast trains, they get, ports, they get, all kinds of industrial parks. And therefore, there is right now a real absolute determination on the part of the global South that they want to end colonialism. They don't want to listen to Sunday speeches from the Europeans anymore, telling them about sustainable development, when they know perfectly well that the EU policy up to now was to say sustainable development means no development. It means everybody can have a little shovel and they can dig their own fountain, but they cannot have large-scale water management. They can't have nuclear power. They can't have, the kinds of infrastructure which would enable industry to grow. But China is offering that, and I think the West will lose this battle, because if they don't understand that the idea that every country on the planet has the right to develop their own way, their own social model, their own tradition, pathway to become developed, I think the systemic rivalry, which the West has called that way, it wouldn't have to be that way, because you could have, I mean, that's the other thing which is so absolutely crazy. If the West would decide to stop geopolitics and say we move from confrontation to cooperation, and then say, okay, Africa needs 600 million people have no access to electricity, so why don't we work together and set up the kinds of energy production and distribution which would enable every country in Africa to have access to enough energy, enough water, to enough all of these things. The conflict would evaporate in a day. And it would be in the interest, I mean, the idea that the West forever, should dominate, and, Fukuyama, I mean, he's the best example of somebody who was utmost foolish, because he said, the end of the Cold War was the end of history. How long did that prognosis last? History started with the effort to try to assert a dominant position in the world. So I think the systemic rivalry will be, lost by the West because of the inability of the present systems to even consider, an adjustment of their policies. So, but I have another question to you, Larry. I mean, when Tulsi Gabbard announced her first batch of documents concerning Russiagate was run by the Obama administration, there was a Democratic congressman or senator, I forgot now which, who said that there will be not one single judge found in the United States who will be willing to prosecute these ridiculous accusations. And now she has released a second batch, and the DOJ apparently has started to set up a process of legal prosecution. So what is your take on, who is stronger, the deep state or the Trump administration in this battle?
Well, the deep state, without a doubt. Look, the real question is, Why is this being released now? These documents and what she's releasing, I think, is important. It clearly shows that there was a coordinated effort between with the CIA in the lead and the FBI. Obama got into this after the election. He wasn't directing it before, but it started in 2015. And so there was active efforts by the CIA with collaboration from the FBI to go after, to paint Trump as a stooge of Putin, a puppet of Putin, and that it was all with an intent to undermine his ability to be a candidate, one, and that failed. And then when he became president, it shifted. They had to hand tie him there. However, all of these documents were there, and I knew that because I had a I had a friend who was well placed within the intelligence community, and he was warning me about this back in 2016. So you step back and say, okay, why are they releasing? They didn't release it at all during Trump's first term. He should have. And they're doing it now. And I believe now they're doing it in order to distract attention away from the Jeffrey Epstein case, which, that opens up a whole other can of worms. But there are crimes that were committed. I think the basic charge would be an 18 U.S.C. defrauding the United States. The real irony here is, though, I don't think Obama could be prosecuted under this in light of the Supreme Court decision that came down in Donald Trump's case that got him off the hook on a number of these other charges. But people like John Brennan, Jim Clapper, James Comey, they ought to be prosecuted, because what they did was a complete abuse of their power, and they turned they were doing the meddling in politics.
We're going to, I don't know, Helga, you want to respond to that? I'd probably not, right? Yeah, but we're going to go right to our question and answer period. Everybody's welcome to join us for that, but there's a particular stipulation to doing that. So Dennis, you want to just make the announcement concerning what has to happen?
Yeah, for those of you who are listening on YouTube or Rumble or other platforms, we are now going to be switching over entirely to the Zoom link for people's direct participation, for question and answers, and so on. So you can join that Zoom discussion by going to the Schiller Institute website and clicking on the Zoom link to get registration for it, and you can join us, and then you can be part of this discussion. So we are going to be stopping the live streaming momentarily and switching over entirely to the Q&A session, but those interested in continuing the discussion should do that. So Dave, just